My dear students of class 10A and 10B, already I have started teaching of Mahatma Gandhi and the national movement. Yet, if you have any confusion, any doubt, you can use comment box. I shall try to satisfy you by sending and by communicating to you with correct clarification. So the remaining part of the lesson, and before starting day's teaching, I shall welcome you for attending the teaching class through online. And once again, I'd like to remind you, students, this lesson in previous class I taught you about the following points: Hindu-Muslim unity, spread of nationalism, Chauri Chaura incident, Simon Commission. These were the points in my previous class I discussed. And now the remaining part of the lesson. Now, civil disobedience movement. What was the reason Gandhiji started the civil disobedience movement? Gandhiji started the civil disobedience movement in order to strengthen the unity of the Hindu and Muslims and the people of our country. Because Gandhiji's call was for the abolition of salt tax. The British government imposed high amount of salt tax. But salt was an item used by the common people, especially poor people. That's why Gandhiji requested them to abolish salt tax either or to reduce the amount of taxes they imposed on it. But the British did not want to solve the problem. On the contrary, they requested Gandhiji to discuss other issues than the imposition of salt tax. So Gandhiji, that's why, gave a call for civil disobedience movement in the year 1930, my dear students. And the movement in character, both the two movements, the civil disobedience movement and the non-cooperation movement, both the two movements was quite different, because the civil disobedience movement was a movement where Gandhiji decided to break certain rules and regulations implemented by the British for the Indian people, and he decided to paralyze the entire administration of the British through the civil disobedience movement. But in non-cooperation movement, Gandhiji decided to non-cooperate all the British goods, non-cooperate with the British administration, to non-cooperate, to give up the British jobs, British schools, British colleges, British universities, to give up the titles of the British given by them, and of course to give up. They gave a call for leaving British schools, British colleges, British universities, and also encourage the students of college, universities, and college to make the universities and college as a center of criticism of British educative policy and other policies. So the British declared. So the British also forbade them from conducting meetings from educational institutions like schools, from colleges and universities. And ultimately, the civil disobedience encouraged Gandhiji to make more and more unity among the people of India. Meanwhile, the British government formed one commission in England. Initially, the British government decided to send a commission to India to break the deadlock of the Indian Congress leaders regarding the need of any constitutional remedies. That's why the commission, before sending the commission for India, the British government the British government formed the commission consisting of 6 members initially. there were six members of British Parliament. With this, the commission was formed, but the Indian Congress, but the Indian leaders who were there in England and from abroad, they had been encouraging Indian national movement, and they requested on behalf of the Indian people, they requested the British government to to make to allow one Indian to be there in the commission. That means total number of members would become 7. And but the British government initially decided whether any Indian member should be included with the commission. But at last they came to a conclusion that 6 members of the British Parliament with which the commission was formed, that would be final. And since one member requested the British government, the Indian leaders who were residing abroad, on behalf of their request, the British government decided to increase one member in the commission. So one more member they increased in the commission instead of 6 and made it 7 members. But another one member they also took from the member of the British Parliament. But no Indian was included as the member of the Simon Commission. So Simon Commission was sent to India composed of 7 members, and ultimately it harmed the sentiments of the Indian people, since there was no Indian member included in the commission. Not a single member was included in the commission. So under the leadership of Sir John Simon, the commission reached India, but the Indian people decided to boycott the commission. And everywhere, wherever the commission went, the resolution, it was a resolution was taken in the Madras session in the year 1927 under the presidency of Dr. Ansari, that the commission would be boycotted by the Congress, by all parties of India, all parties, not only Congress but all parties, Hindu Mahasabha, Muslim League, everyone decided to boycott the commission. So on 3rd February, when the commission reached Bombay, that time an all India Hartal was organized, and the commission went, it was greeted with Hartals, black flags, demonstrations, and everywhere the commission reached, the commission was greeted with black flags and black flag demonstration by saying, or under the slogan, Simon go back, Simon go back, Simon Commission should be rejected, like that. So the government used brutal suppression on Indian people because there was a huge lathi blows, and one eminent leader, Lala Lajpat Rai, while conducting or while processing one meeting at Lahore railway platform, he was severely injured. He was mercilessly beaten by the British police, and in 1921 the incident took place, and then ultimately he lost his life as a result of lathi blows. So this is Simon Commission, my dear students. And next point, the civil disobedience movement, how reaction against the commission. Reaction against the commission, I discussed about it, because the commission was greeted with black flags. No one cooperated with the commission, since there was no single member was there, but one request was there, came from the leader of abroad, that one Indian member should be included with the commission, but instead of 6, ultimately they increased 1 member, but they did not take any Indian member in their commission. So the member they came with 7 members in India to to make an investigation over the issue of further any kind of constitutional reforms required for the Indian people. And then and the people of India non-cooperated with it, rejected it and boycotted the commission. So this is the reaction against the commission. And next point, the reason Gandhiji started the movement. The reason why did Gandhiji start the civil disobedience movement? The Gandhiji started the civil disobedience movement in order to provide in order to give one one signal to the British government that the Indian must protest against the oppressive rule of the British government because of the racial discrimination they had been practicing. The racial discrimination means the commission came to India with 7 members. All members belong to England, not an Indian member was there. So it was nothing but a racial discrimination. The British wanted to show the Indian people it was a great insult. So the people of India felt insulted under the leadership of Gandhiji. They decided to protest it. That's why before starting the civil disobedience movement, Gandhiji gave 11 ultimatum that either you withdraw the salt tax or reduce the amount they imposed on salt, because salt was used by the common people, poor people. That's why it should be immediately withdrawn. But the British did not respond to the call of Gandhiji, and so Gandhiji, after waiting in vain for the government response to his ultimatum, Gandhiji started the civil disobedience movement with his famous Dandi March. Dandi was a place near Gujarat seashore, my dear students. So from Sabarmati Ashram, Gandhiji started for Dandi, a place near Gujarat seashore, in order to break the salt law and in order to produce salt from the sea water. That's why while living for Dandi from Sabarmati Ashram, a number of followers of Gandhiji joined him. So Gandhiji started for Dandi on foot from Sabarmati Ashram to Dandi, a long journey Gandhiji covered with his followers, and he reached near the seashore of Gujarat, Dandi, Dandi, and broke the salt law. And at the time when he reached there, Gandhiji broke the salt law and also pick up some salt left sea waves. But from the sea water, Gandhiji produced salt from there. And as per the salt law, there was a system of the British. The Britishers had implemented the laws. What was about it? No one would have any right to produce salt, to make salt without the consent of the British government. Because salt can be produced only from seawater. So no one would have any right to produce or to make salt from seawater without the consent of the British. So Gandhiji broke the salt law. Since Gandhiji gave 11 ultimatum for the British and British did not respond to the call of 11 ultimatum, and Gandhiji started the civil disobedience movement. Hence, Gandhiji broke the salt law. Gandhiji was totally ready to be imprisoned along with his followers. But there was none to reach there to arrest Gandhiji and his followers. Gandhiji broke the salt law and made salt from the sea water, and then Gandhiji broke the salt law, which marked the beginning of the civil disobedience movement, my dear students. And civil disobedience movement proved that Gandhiji would like to give one message to the British government. Gandhiji wanted to communicate a message to the British government that either the British should consider their demands or Gandhiji would continue resisting the foreign rule by means of an action, that is action known the action, not aggressive. The action means not with violence, but following the same system of non-violence. But in some cases, Gandhiji movement had become more and more aggressive. Why? Because this time when Gandhiji started the civil disobedience movement, Gandhiji decided to paralyze some rules and regulations of the government, the British government had implemented for the Indian people. Gandhiji decided to paralyze the government, and ultimately there was huge repercussion among the Indian people and the British. The British felt its effectiveness and started arresting a number of Indian Congress leaders, and ultimately Gandhiji himself was arrested. Next day, I shall continue the remaining part, my dear students. If you have any problem, any difficulty, you can use comment box. I shall solve your problem. I shall give you a good clarification for your better understanding. Thank you, my dear students.